Hi friends, welcome back. So today I thought it would be fun if we did a little painting tutorial, and as you all know, as soon as we get into this season, I like painting these little wooden discs. So I have a couple little woodland critters that I want to paint, and I thought it would be fun if we sat down together and painted them. And because they're really tiny, we're going to do two, so that we can kind of go back and forth between the two designs. I am going to do voiceover on this to see if I can better explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it, because I tend to be not great at describing what I'm doing as I'm actually doing it on camera. Anyway, I hope it's alright with you guys. And yeah, enjoy the video. Let's change the camera angle and get to it. Alright, so I'm going to start with the background, and I'm just going to be covering the full background of both of these two ornaments with a mix of greens. I want to stick with a light color. My intention is for one of these to be a painting of a badger and a log, and the other one to be a branch with a tufted titmouse, I believe it is. That's a bird on it. So I want to keep the backgrounds pretty light, and I also want to keep them a color that will show up on a lot of Christmas trees, because I have in the recent present been known to paint these ornaments in too dark of a color, and then if I put them on the tree, they just vanish onto the tree and you don't see them at all. So these two, I want to keep them a little bit lighter, so I'm mostly sticking with a Japanesque pale green and an aqua green, and then I'm mixing in cypress, that's that darker green, just to give it a little bit of depth and a little bit of extra character, otherwise known as character, just so it's not one flat color. I don't want it to be too flat. I do want it to have life and movement, but I don't want to have to actually paint in a lot of details. I want you to, when you're painting something this small, it makes sense to make your background a little bit more blurry, quote unquote, so that your foreground will stand out and your eye isn't just fighting to figure out where to look. At least in my experience, that's the easiest way to do it, is to just make the backgrounds kind of plain, make it be something to where the eye isn't going to look at it and go like, what is that? Or why is that just one color? Because your eye will notice if it's just one color and could think that it's weird. Obviously, you're aware that it's a painting, but if you do something like this where you have some color variance, you can at least think of it as kind of the bokeh style, to where you're looking at light through the trees and it's blurred in your vision. So that's kind of what I'm going for. I'm not going for any specific shapes with the background. I am literally just painting in a lot of light and a little bit of dark, just so that it has a little bit of contrast, but not too much. Again, especially the bird, he's pretty light in color, so I do want to make sure that he can still pop, but I also want to make sure that he's not like, you don't want him to disappear, but you don't want him to be like too loud in the front. You get it. So I do add a fair bit of water to my paint when I'm doing these. I find that it flows a little better on the wood, and I find that I get kind of a clearer and cleaner paint in general. I think it just shows up in a really pretty way when I do it like this. So this is just how I do it. If you're okay with using more paint and having it not flow very well, but having less risk of your wood cracking, then just do that and go for more paint or go for acrylic. These are obviously gouache, so they behave very nicely if you add water to them. In fact, the Turner ones prefer if you add water to them. Liquitex you can use straight out of the bottle, and the aqua green that I'm using right now is Liquitex. The other two are Turner. Ooh, what else was I going to tell you guys about these? Oh, um, if when if you want to do these but you don't have easy access to gouache, you can also do this exact same thing with acrylics. I don't know how oils behave on literally anything. I am very well known for carrying my paintbrush like between my teeth, and oils scare me for that reason because I know that they're toxic. So acrylics and gouache are my happy place. I don't have to think about anything being toxic, and I can just paint to my heart's content and not have to be like, oh no, that's toxic. Everything that I use is fine and it's not going to kill me. But I know that you can do a lot of these same techniques with just plain acrylic. My sister-in-law does that a lot, and she comes up with some really cute designs. I am not as accustomed to painting with true acrylic anymore, so I'm not really a good authority on telling you what techniques to use for that. I have done a few this year with just acrylic, but not enough that I would really want to give you any advice on it. Because all of the ones that I did in acrylic were not particularly amazing. They were fine, but they weren't my favorites, where my gouache ones I have absolutely loved and I've really enjoyed all my techniques. I am so sorry at this point. I did not realize that my hands had slipped down and I wasn't fully in frame. So you'll be able to see this in full later on. I think at some point I will lift it up so it is more in frame, but I am just trying to make this one be a little darker on the bottom left than it is on the right. This one's going to be the badger painting. So I have this idea for it having more darker tones at the bottom and lighter toward the top. At this point, I have let both of these dry and I have sketched on the outlines for the two pieces that we're going to be doing. You can see the bird pretty clearly in this angle. So for right now, we are starting on the log that the badger is going to be putting his paw up on. I believe I am using raw umber for this. I did not keep track of which brown I used, and I put everything away as soon as I was done. I apologize. Any brown you like will really suffice. I didn't use a whole lot of colors. I wanted to keep this relatively simple. So there's that. But I am basically just filling in where my sketch was. I do find, especially when doing the teeny tiny paintings like this, it is just easier to get your background, sketch your foreground, and then paint your foreground. I find that when I don't sketch it, I end up with a lot more of a mess, and if I have at least a basic sketch, then I have an idea of what I'm doing. And now you can see too why I wanted to work on two paintings at once, which is that log needs to dry before I can do any texturing or the mushrooms that I want to put on it. And while that's drying, I can work on the branch for the bird painting. Also, as you can see, it cracked. While I was working on the other one, I heard a snap sound and I couldn't figure out what it was. And a little while later, I realized this thing had just cracked all the way up the side. So I did, in the top right, I did another one, very similar, and the same thing happened again. And I've had it happen before, but never twice in a row, so I was really surprised. I was not pleased with that. So here I am just mixing some white into whatever brown that was. And I am just adding some texture to that log so it looks more like a log and less like a brown line. I try to be pretty particular about making sure that I do put texture on some things. For a while, I just always forgot to texture my wood. And then I would look back at my paintings and be like, why does this look so flat? Well, it's because you didn't even add any striations into your wood, and wood never looks like that. So at the very least, I highly recommend just mixing a little bit of white in with your brown, and just adding some texture lines, because trees have bark and bark has texture. I don't recommend for something like this, especially if you're going to do something like a badger or a bird or whatever kind of animal, I don't recommend trying to do some kind of fancy tree, because it's just going to disappear anyway. It's just going to be the thing that you don't really focus on. So just do a little bit of dry brushing and make it look woodish. Then while that dries, I got some emerald green and I mixed this with ivy green. Emerald green is Liquitex and ivy green is Turner. And I have the finest liner I could find. I think this is a 00 brush. And I am adding little pine needles to this entire branch. I do have a reference photo for this. It is an actual photo of a bird, and the the needles on this branch are so crisp and clean in that picture that I really wanted to see if I could get it to be anything like that in the painting. I'm pretty pleased with how well this teeny tiny brush did, but let me know what you guys think. I know I really like doing tiny details. I think they're just fun. I think that's probably a big part of why I like doing the little ornaments in the first place, is that I like doing the little tiny details. But I am basically just going back and forth between the colors and adding little lines to be the pine needles. With my reference photo, it was pretty easy to figure out like where to put them. If you are doing something like this, I highly, highly recommend just pulling up a few references on your phone and just flipping back and forth between references while you're painting. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. It is a fabulous tool, and we have technology now that allows you to just look up pictures. And it's not plagiarism if you are using somebody's picture as a reference. You are using it to figure out how you want stuff placed. You are using it to figure out how to paint the thing that they already portrayed. Especially in photography, I find that a lot of photographers are honestly flattered if you use their stuff as reference. I use several photographers' work as reference photos for my stuff, and all of the photographers I've spoken to about it just think that that's super cool, and they really love that I appreciate their work enough to use it as a reference for developing my own skill in painting. So highly recommended to do stuff like that. Now here I'm using that same tiny brush and I am making little mushrooms on the side of this log. I mixed in some yellow ochre into that light brown that we made for the striations in the wood, just to add a little bit of a difference of color. I was just going to do the brown and I thought it would disappear a little bit too much. So just that tiny little touch of yellow ochre I think makes this pop super well. I also added just some little dots around it just to add, a little more texture, a little more variance. And I thought that turned out really cute. It just added some nice detail to the log, and I wanted my badger to look like he was sniffing something, and mushrooms seemed like a good thing to be sniffing, if that makes sense. And since those mushrooms were so small and are not in the way, I'm going to go ahead and start the badger next. He is just he's not 3 colors, he's 2 colors. He is just titanium white and Mars black. I only used Liquitex for him, and I very meticulously sketched out based on, again, a photograph. I think this one might have been from like Nat Geo or something. But I had a couple of different reference photos for the coloration of badgers. And then I had one in particular for this exact position that I wanted him in. So I'm starting with the white because badgers do have on their face this like very bright white, and I didn't want to risk having any black on my brush unintentionally when I did his face. So I decided to start with the white and build up from there. So I've got little marks for his ears, I've got most of his face, and I find that when you're doing an animal with fur, it is a lot easier than you think it's going to be because you don't have to be so strict with your brush strokes. You can kind of be a little bit more loosey-goosey, especially if you're just doing tiny little lines, which is what I'm doing here with a very small, this is a number 0 round brush. I just do little tiny lines so that it looks like fur. And then if you get one in the wrong spot, well, is it really the wrong spot? Because animals don't really have the exact same markings as each other ever, and it is not abnormal to have a little bit of one color or the other in a different spot. So I think it's totally fine when you're painting furry little woodland creatures to let yourself be a little bit more free with it and not worry so much about it coming out perfect, because it not coming out perfect is what makes it seem more like it's a real animal and less like it's a painting of an animal. You get it? You get it. I do spend a decent amount of time on the badger. When you're painting on wood, you will find that your brush dries out really fast. So I do have to refill my brush a lot more often than I normally would, which is totally fine. I have plenty of paint on my palette for this. I tend to put a little bit more than what I think I'm gonna need, and I'm either spot on or I have just a tiny bit too much, and I would rather have a tiny bit too much on my palette to start than not have enough on my palette to start and then have to remember what color went where. Clearly, I need to work on not putting everything away while I'm in the middle of a painting. I did try to leave some stuff out while we were painting so that my table didn't look so empty. So here I'm back to that liner brush, and I am painting in his claws, his paw, and his little front leg. And then we're going to switch back again. And like I said, we're just going in with these little tiny dabs or little tiny brush strokes just to try to make it really look like fur. And I'm going to bring the white down a little bit farther down his neck than I think I'm going to need it, because the next thing we're going to do is add in the gray for his back. And here I'm just going to keep dipping into black and white and mixing different shades of gray, because badgers on their back are just all sorts of different shades of gray. So rather than have him have like a skunk stripe down his back, which isn't natural for badgers, I'm just gonna mix and kind of mix on the canvas various shades of gray to get to around where my reference photo is. He doesn't need to look perfect, like I said, he just needs to look cute and like a badger. So back and forth, I'll add a little bit more dark color. When I'm getting closer to the black, I'll even go straight into white to feather it into the white section of his fur. I also make sure to like feather the edges of the badger. Basically, I try to make sure that his fur doesn't have a crisp edge to it, but that he looks a little bit fluffy, because again, he's fluffy, so he should have fluff. So I try to make sure that all of the lines of his fur are feathered into each other instead of having a stark contrast between colors. If you were going for a more cartoony style animal, you would just do color blocks instead of trying to feather it in. And depending on what you're going for, either one, totally acceptable, totally cute. I am currently trying to do a little bit more realism with my animal paintings in particular. So I do my best to make it really look like fur and really have that nice fur texture and fur finish. And here we're just going to take that little liner brush and add in his nosy. And that's just pure black because it's an animal nose. They tend to be black. I find that when you add in the nose, especially on an animal that is like that you're just looking at the side profile, adding the nose just makes them look so much more lifelike. They now just look like really cute and they've got personality and they're just here sniffing away. And there's something about it that's so cute and I love it. I don't find the same to be true if I am painting an animal head on. I find that the nose is like inordinately difficult then. So here I'm just adding some extra little details to, again, make sure that the fur is nicely feathered in and it's not too stark a contrast anywhere and matches pretty well with my reference. And that is basically it for the badger. He's pretty simple. Again, I highly recommend putting in a sketch. It helps so much. Oh, I'm just going to add his eye. That's what it is. I knew there was something else. His eye is black and it is in the black stripe of his face. So I added 2 little gray lines to kind of outline where his eye would be. I thought that would work pretty well for him. But yeah, real cute. Cute little badger. Now that that one is done, and I did a lot of wet on wet with that, which is what we're also going to do with the bird. I think when I'm doing the actual subject matter of these, I like to do wet on wet, but otherwise I like to let the steps totally dry so that I don't accidentally pull up any color. Again, I'm sure I've said this like a million times, but I don't paint with traditional gouache, I paint with acrylic gouache. So unlike traditional gouache, which is watercolor, once it dries, is set. So I can do this where I kind of build up layers and layers and layers of gouache, where if you're using traditional gouache, you're kind of limited to, I think it's a max of 2 or 3, depending on how heavy-handed you are. But with painting with acrylic gouache, I can do a full gouache background and then do a wet on wet foreground, and it's not going to pull my background color up. Where if you did traditional gouache, it would absolutely pull the background color up. So again, I'm just using black and white for the bird. I will add a touch of yellow ochre under his wing. What is he? Tufted titmouse. Tufted titmice? Tufted titmouse birds have a little bit of yellow under their wing. So I'll add that at some point. But I did kind of a super pale gray for his belly and then a medium gray for his wing with a little bit of a darker gray just to add kind of some contouring. And then his little tuft is in gray. This one, if you don't have a teeny tiny brush, will be very difficult. I painted this entirely with a liner brush because that was the easiest for me. I'm painting the tail in, and it kind of goes between some of those pine needle branches, which was a little tricky, but I made it work. But some of these details are just very, very small. And if that is too daunting for you, then maybe stick with the badger, and on the second one, try a fox or something. You can do it. I believe in you. Birds are really not that difficult. They're fairly basic shapes, which is really nice. I am actually trying to get my mom to branch out and paint more birds. And so far she's doing really well with it. We'll see if she continues. But I really like doing, this is my second tufted titmouse. Obviously this is the smallest one I've ever done. The other one I did is he's probably about 4 inches high. So this one's much smaller, much less detail. But he also came out just very cute and honestly didn't take that long to do. He is, if you do have the tiny brushes and you want to try doing a little bird, he's a good one to start with because, again, he's only 3 colors. He's black, white, and yellow. And tufted titmice kind of have a little bit of a paint by numbers color scheme. They're darker gray in some spots, lighter gray in some spots, very pale gray underbelly, and a little touch of yellow. So if you do want to start painting birds, even if you don't want to start with the tiniest one ever, I highly recommend the tufted titmouse. There's also a lot of really good reference photos. You could just Google them. And there's a lot of really cute pictures, a lot that I think are super suitable for paintings. I think I have like 6 or 7 different tufted titmouse reference photos saved just to figure out like different poses and stuff. They're very cute birds. We do have them where I live, and my mom really enjoys them. I am legitimately very sad that this ornament cracked. I go back and forth on whether I should have actually put the bird on it because he's so cute, and there's this giant crack. I do go in and do the eye with a marker just because I don't want to mess it up by using a brush. And then he's done. One cute little birdie. This was a lot of fun, you guys. I hope that you enjoyed this as much as I did. I have been having way too much fun with the tiny ornaments. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a fabulous rest of your week, and I will see you in a couple weeks with a brand new video.